I'm Professor Sky. Welcome to my course on Haiti, the most important country in the world. And this only half of the class is going to be about the Haitian Revolution. But yet, this is the seventh episode, the seventh class that I've uploaded here, and we're only now getting to the actual revolution. I wanted to have a lot of setup, a lot of preparedness, especially around the themes of like the interconnectedness between Saint-Domingue, what's now called Haiti and France, and interconnectedness of themes of freedom and equality and enlightenment. But we're finally going to actually arrive at the beginning of the revolution here. This is my little preamble, which is that this is not the same thing as taking a college class. You should be active, and YouTube learning is passive learning. So I'm glad to have you here. You can learn. I encourage you to take notes. I encourage you to get the books that I'm using, read those. Yes, and the class is for a 200 level, so it's mostly for freshmen. So perhaps you are a Haitian historian. If you are, please feel free to correct me. Please feel free to criticize me. This is my best attempt, but I'm not like an expert in Haiti, but I do think I'm a pretty good teacher, and I just think this stuff really needs to be learned. So that's why I created the class. So, anyways, let's get started with the revolution begins. I'm going to click on my PowerPoint slide here. All right, that's what I'm sharing. Continue to share. The Haitian Revolution begins. These are the sources. Mostly, I'm using the Mike Duncan podcast. What's great is that I've done enough research on the Haitian Revolution to know that I can see where he gets all of his stuff. So like he does a great job of synthesizing a lot of the information, and a lot of the places he clearly got his information are other things I'm going to include, which is C.L.R. James's The Black Jacobins, and in this episode, The Avengers of the New World by Laurent Dubois. So, anyways, if you want to know more, if you want to go deeper, I suggest you get those. Students and friends, I am Professor Sky. My name is perhaps known to you. I have undertaken to teach about Haiti. I want curiosity and a thirst for complex understanding to reign in this class. Let's work. I am working to help that happen. Unite yourselves, students, and learn with me for the same cause. I ask my students, I compel my students to take notes. That's one of the big parts of their grade is just taking notes because you have to be active if you're going to learn. And so I title every class. This one is called The Revolution Begins. And I just want to take 1 second here to show off. This is actually the map that I made. Okay, I can show you here. So I actually encourage you to draw a map of Haiti because I didn't do this the first time I taught the class, and I think it's actually really useful to see the distances, the topography maybe a little bit. And just sort of do your best. I did this freehand. I didn't trace it or anything, but I think it really helped me to understand the kind of the north, the south, the west, etc. And I'll tell you what, if you draw your own map of Haiti, and you tag at Professor Sky on Instagram, I'll like it. Okay, I want to see everyone's drawings of Haiti. Okay, because I think it's interesting that we have some sense of scale, because that's one of the things we'll be talking about today. Just how different this how differently scale and time worked. So what I did was I just drew all the miles. I apologize to everybody who doesn't use the ridiculous imperial system. I drew all the miles in between places. So, Port-au-Prince to Cap Haitien, at this point called Cap Français, is 120 miles, 178 miles out that way, Saint-Marc, just so you have an idea of what the actual distances are. And it's also worth emphasizing this is how hilly and mountainous the whole island is. So the plains are where most of the money is made because that's where you can dig canals and therefore that's where you can put sugarcane fields, right? So it's important to note just how mountainous this whole area is because we're going to be we're going to be having all sorts of stories of things happening wildly far apart. But if you look on them on a map, we're talking about Massachusetts, so it's like something is happening in Boston and something else is happening in Worcester, but it might as well be on the other side of the moon. Okay. So we're going to be doing a little review in my class, not here, because you can just go back and watch the video again on the three clubs, then the three revolts, and then the Bois Caiman ceremony. That's what we're going to be focusing on now. So the question I'm going to be asking of my students, and just feel free to do this at home, okay? If you watched the last class, all about the sort of the way that the Enlightenment was starting to really shake things up. I just want to take 1 more second to really, really drive that point home. So my point is not that the enslaved people of Saint-Domingue were reading Rousseau and Diderot and decided that they had to be free. My point is that the Enlightenment and its values of equality so successfully disrupted the previously existing order in humanity that it permitted the conditions for which the slave revolt could take part. So obviously, it was all the bravery, the intelligence, the coordination of all the enslaved people to break free of their condition, right? They did it all on their own. They didn't have help from anybody, certainly not from anybody reading Diderot, right? But still, it is worth emphasizing that the fact that this kind of thinking led to these revolutions, led to the American Revolution, led to the French Revolution, led all these ideas, just created the cognitive dissonance, just created all of this fissures and made it such a ripe area for revolution. I just want to really make that clear that when I talk about the connection between the Enlightenment and Haiti, it's more that like it created the environment that pushed it to happen. It was going to happen eventually, but I think it had to happen when it happened. Okay, that should be clear. Okay, Sky, stop over explaining. So if you don't remember, Club Massiac was the group of whites and people who benefited from the slave trade, and as well many landowning whites in Haiti, in Saint-Domingue. It's still called Saint-Domingue at this point. The Society of American Colonists are the people representing who we call the coloreds. As a brief reminder, I use the term coloreds, and sometimes I will use the term slave. These are not preferred terminology now, but these are historically accurate terms, and they've been used by historians up until very recently. So I apologize if that's a little bit jarring. And then Society of the Friends of the Blacks, which, if you don't remember, is a group of all just white dudes, all white dudes in Paris who are actually trying to fight slavery in the colonies, which is actually a brave stance because it is the primary cash cow for the entire country. So if they're trying to transition to away from a monarchy towards a republic, towards a democracy, and the primary source or one of the primary sources of money that they have is being questioned, it does actually take some bravery to say, let's turn off the money faucet. But I want to just zoom in on this image because it's interesting. This is one of the images associated with the Society for the Friends of the Blacks, and it's the thing that they're holding. You know, that they're holding the May 15th decree and the rights of man. If you don't remember, the rights of man, the first article of which is men are born and remain equal in rights and in distinction and social distinction. So right off the bat, that's the first thing they say. The French Constitution is based on that. Everything in the whole French Revolution is stemming from this idea of all equality. So here's somebody saying, hey, what about these things that you said? So this decree, the May 15th decree, May 15th, it arrives in July. So you might be wondering, how is that possible? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. What this does is this leads immediately to the first revolution. It leads to the White Revolt. The big white planters who own everything, the small whites who don't own much but are feeling that the more the colored people, the more the mixed race people are put down, the more likely they are to succeed, especially if they could potentially seize all of their land, which is their hope. And even the bourgeois white, they're all united in the idea that whatever the hell they said on May 15th, that's not going to cut it here. So they revolt, and this newly arrived royal governor Blancheland, who just bummer of a post. This was not a good time to be sent to Saint-Domingue. And he just straight up said, this is just not going to be enforceable. I mean, he's stuck between so many rocks and so many hard places, he doesn't really know how to move forward. So the Society of the American Colonists, if you don't remember, Auger, one of the leaders, was broken on the wheel, and then he was beheaded. And you got to remember, this is happening, and May 15th arrives in July. So this leads, once they understand Auger has been taken out, the whites are never going to agree with it. The royal governor is not really going to try to enforce it. The French government has officially declared by the May 15th decree that if you are a second generation free person, that is to say, if both of your parents were born free, then you are a citizen with equal rights. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. That's what the French government says. That's the official line. So already, Auger tried to take up arms. He failed, got broken on the rack and beheaded. And then we have another group of people down there in the town of Mirabel with Rigaud, the goldsmith. Now, I'm going to be asking my students, because I expected them to have read something and listened to a podcast, um, to talk about who his parents were, but I'll just tell you. His mom was an enslaved woman, and his dad was a owner. Okay, so a very typical story of a half black person, half white person in this country, but there were not very many women. And he was prepared to fight with whom? This is really important. He was prepared to fight with the enslaved. So that's pretty major, because as a reminder, we're talking 500,000 enslaved people, 30,000 whites, 30,000 coloreds. Those numbers do not favor the white and the coloreds. Was he a full citizen after May 15th? What do you think? No, he wasn't, because his mom was born enslaved. So he is very self-interested in fighting against in even even if he doesn't get the right, he still understands that the way that things are slipping backwards, that they're not holding to it, that he has to fight maybe for his children, right? Okay. So he's willing to fight. Sorry, it says I'm screen sharing. I just need to make sure that it looks correct. Okay. So in the podcast that my students listen to, there are references to what were called elite slaves, and I wanted to first of all say it should be uh, um, the elites among the enslaved people, but the term that's used at this point in all historical documents that my students will have read will say elite slaves. I just want to make it clear, like who they are, because that might seem like a contradiction, the idea of elite and slaves. But there are hierarchies. There are hierarchies everywhere. And these are people who do not have the same experience as my imaginary black X who's in the sugar fields, or black Y who's in the sugar fields. You know, they both come. These are people I created from imaginary stories I created for the class. Black X, all the way there on the left, came from the north of Africa, or the western northwestern Africa, was taken and put on the plantation. Uh, Black Y was taken from further south in Africa, used to be a chieftain, used to be a chief of his tribe. He was also enslaved. They were put on the same plantation. And then the woman there, who I call Black Z, actually had a kid with the plantation owner and works in the house. But none of them quite fit in the category of what one would call elite slaves. What we're talking about are people like coachmen. And this is what we'll see. Toussaint, who we're going to be talking about soon. These are people who are in charge of driving around the plantation owner. So maybe it's driving him into town, maybe it's driving him around the plantation to make sure that the managers are looking over the drivers who are looking over the enslaved people. That's what it is. That's an elevated position. You have close proximity to the power of the master, plus you have close proximity to all the places that he goes. You see a lot more. There are also many elite slaves who are promoted to be drivers, which is to say the people who actually push around the enslaved. I used the image of a white slave driver, which of course there were small white slave drivers, but there were also many black slave drivers who had an elevated position, who were given a lot of trust, who are given weapons with which to whip and hurt the enslaved people to make sure that they work hard enough. And it's part of the whole idea of this class. This class is not that there are good people and there are bad people. It's really a class about how greed turns people into bad people. I don't know. That's a subtext, which we could say. So the thing about the elite slaves and why they're so important to all of these uprisings, because we have the white uprising, they're looking for freedom against the French. We have the colored uprising. They're looking for freedom against the whites and the French. And then we're going to have the enslaved people, the blacks, who want freedom from the French, the whites, and the coloreds. And what's amazing is what do they know? They obviously know the enslaved people. They're in close proximity. They come from their ranks. They know the coloreds because they often have to work with them or interact with them. They know what's going on in France because they are more privy to news. They're often taught how to read, or they often already know how to read, which allows them to be in a more elevated position. They know what's going on there, and they also know what's going on in Saint-Domingue. So, like, they're sort of the best placed, most informed people on the entire island because they are able to see everything. They are lined. They have a lot of the knowledge of the oppressors, and they have a lot of lived experience and contact with the oppressed. So it makes sense that when the revolution actually starts, which I promise it's about to start, it's going to be organized by a lot of elite slaves, enslaved people. So I just want to just give you this calendar. Did you know you can find calendars going back forever? So, anyways, the decree was passed, I guess, on a Sunday. I guess the National Assembly was working late. The May 15th decree that second generation, I just want to make this really super clear here. The decree is so crucial because it is giving the idea that coloreds are allowed to be citizens. It is a direct action against formalized racism. Formalized racism, which, as you've been following along in the class, has been going up, up, up and away in the colony. Now they're saying, no, if you are second generation, then you get to be free. So this is a very important decree, even though it only applies to a couple hundred people. It doesn't apply to that many people. It really doesn't. What matters is that it's a sign. It's a sign that race is not going to be the determining factor. Last class, I kept on asking class or race. Well, this is apparently saying to de-emphasize the importance of race, which is a difficult thing to happen in a white supremacist society. But just as a reminder, the distance between these places is amazing between France and Saint-Domingue. It's a 2 month voyage, 4,670 miles. So it takes a long time. And this long time is going to mean that, like, we're dealing with revolutions, we're dealing with impassioned lawmakers making decisions that seem almost capricious from one day to the next. There's no cell phones, there's no letters, there's no videos, there's nothing. There's just get on a boat and travel a couple months and you'll be able to tell. So a lot of stuff happens while people are in transit. So the May 15th decree happens and a whole bunch of other stuff happens. There are some uprisings in June, and then we get to July. The early July is when the decree finally arrives. And then this is the month where we start having coloreds and whites revolting for their rights because the May 15 decree creates two separate revolts. One, the whites, because they can't believe that this was done to them. And two, the coloreds, that they can't believe that the whites won't let this happen. Those two different things. And it's all tied into how much they respect the provisional government in France and how much they want to protect the sugar. And in August, that's when it's all going to start going down in the north. Okay, so when I say the north, I mean like the part near Le Cap. Okay, le Cap Français, le Cap Haitien. Now we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the beginning of the revolution. I spent an hour, an hour today. I went through Dubois. I went through l'ouverture.org. I went through CLR James. I went through Wikipedia. I went through actually two Dubois books. I just looked everywhere. I went to the history podcast, and when you try to find a definitive, decisive idea of exactly what the order was of how this revolution started, there is a reality, which is important, but there is the myth that is founded on a deeper reality. So I'm going to do my best to teach you the truth of the Haitian Revolution, how it actually started, while also saying like it doesn't matter. I mean, what matters is the myth of Bois Caiman. So let's get to that myth here. And just as a point of reference, so we're going to be talking about the Bois Caiman that happened on August 14th, 1791, which most probably did not happen on August 14th, 1791, but which, for all intents and purposes, did happen then. Let me explain. This is Paul Revere. You know Paul Revere. Helped the American colonists fight against the British overlords. Do you know what he yelled when he was taking his horse through the streets of Boston? Did he yell, "The British are coming, the British are coming"? No, that wouldn't have made any sense. That's too vague. There's a lot of Brits, and on top of that, like everybody there was already British, like they weren't Americans yet. So like saying the British are coming is kind of a confusing thing. It would be like, I don't know, if you lived in Boston and you were trying to start a new town in Boston, and then the police were coming and you said, the Bostonians are coming. Well, it's like we're all Bostonians now. What they actually said was the regulars are coming out. That's what he said. It's not as catchy as the British are coming, and it doesn't fit the historical narrative. We don't really know what regulars mean. That means a certain kind um, of British soldier. So, like, it's an important thing, but that's what he said. That's the truth. The myth is that he said the British are coming, and the truth is what he meant, what we think he means, is the British are coming. So, the truth of it, and this is found in The Avengers of the New World by Dubois, in August 1791, a series of nighttime meetings of slaves took place in the Northern Plain. That's it, a series. There was many of them. As Mike Duncan, the Revolutions podcast, pointed out, they were not all forbidden. The slave owners understood that it was necessary that sometimes, especially the elite slaves, were able to meet together and talk. It was a good way of keeping morale up. It was seen as perhaps a way to avoid revolution. In this case, it's not working out well. So, they had like one meeting, and you heard about this if you listen to the podcast, and they were going to like plan to like do it 10 days later, but then someone got too anxious and they started doing a revolution and they ratted everybody out and they all got together. All those details, we're just going to boil that all down to one thing. Bois Caiman on August 14th, 1791. Is this going to get me demonetized? I don't know. I don't know. So I'm going to do this with my students. I'm just going to say, identify the elements of the Bois Caiman ceremony, one of the most represented images in Haitian art. What is it that is here? I'm going to have them hopefully point out the following things: the conch shell, the woman, the man, the pig, the weather, the fire, the woods. Okay, these are all of these elements that make up the Bois Caiman mythology. Now, did a bunch of enslaved people meet in the woods in a place that's called Bois Caiman and decide to start a slave uprising? Most likely, yeah, that probably happened. Whether or not it happened like this, whether or not there was a priestess, whether or not the words that were recorded being said are the words that were said, we don't know. What we do know is that it happened because that's how it's remembered. August. Yeah, look at that. See, it's even on a stamp right there. So, what was the Bois Caiman ceremony? It was a secret meeting organized by the elite. So they knew what was going on. They knew that the whites and the coloreds were unhappy, that the whites were fighting against, because they knew, because they were paying attention, because they had their eyes in every single corner of the colony. So they knew that the coloreds were upset that they were still being treated as less than. They knew that the whites were upset that they were being asked to be told. They knew that the whites were upset about the exclusive. They knew that everywhere, all over the place, all anyone was talking about was freedom. The whites wanted to be free. The coloreds wanted to be free. The French wanted to be free. Everybody talking about freedom. They knew this was the moment. Not just the historical moment, but like the moment at the time. Like they weren't thinking, "Hey, what did Rousseau think?" No, but this it was clear to them that this was the moment to strike. Oh wait, sorry, I have to share the slide again. I start talking randomly when you can't see anything. In the woods, and it took the form of a voodoo ceremony. I am going to do an entire class, an entire video on the voodoo religion. I'll just stay 1 second, just 1 second here. Voodoo is a religion. It deserves all of the respect and care that you would grant to any other religion. Perhaps you are intolerant of any religion other than your own, in which case, if you choose to be disrespectful of that religion, I personally think that one should be tolerant towards all faiths. Um, but But if you consider yourself to be tolerant towards faiths in general, and you say, I would respect a Muslim, I would respect a Jew, I would respect a Christian, I would respect a Buddhist or a Hindu, you have to have, it is a moral obligation to respect the voodoo religion as a religion. Now, it's gotten a bad name for a bunch of reasons, which I'll go into in this class. It's, it's got a bad name because of racism. That's why. That's why. As a quick thing that I'll go into further, you have to understand that everybody who came to Saint-Domingue came from different parts of Africa, and there were some religious rites that they took from Africa, and they mixed in some of those rites from certain parts of Africa, mostly the part that's called Dahomey, but still like kind of mixed from all over, and then mix it together with some of the Catholicism that they've been learning because, they're Catholic furniture according to the Code Noir. And all these things mixed together, and much like a Creole is a mixture of African languages and European languages that is made out of necessity by people who are put in a terrible position, you have to think of it as if we were abducted and taken to the planet Zerblots, and we were all kind of different religions, and we just basically came up with some kind of religion that was like maybe mostly Christian, but also a little bit Islam, and then just some Buddhism just kind of thrown in there. And then, of course, we also always have to talk about praising the Zerblots god, Nuk Nuk. Like all those things kind of have to go together. That's a way to think about the voodoo religion, but we'll talk about that later. It gets people very upset. Um, it actually gets Haitian people very upset quite often because it is a stereotype that is used against them, that this religion is somehow inferior because it is strange to people who do not practice it or understand it. It's strange, like anything is strange that you don't understand. But anyways, just to start off, I promise we're gonna have an entire class. We're gonna talk about the Loa. We're gonna talk about the Veve. We're gonna talk all about the importance of voodoo. But this is a really important moment, though, in terms of the history of voodoo, because this is part of the national foundation. This is the national foundational myth. This is the Minutemen in Lexington. This is Paul Revere riding through the night. And it was in the form of a religious ceremony with apparently a voodoo priestess, who's that woman you saw who sometimes wears a shirt. There was apparently a sacrifice of a Creole pig. Lots of religions sacrifice animals. It's a very, very standard thing. Um, and all presided over by Dutty Boukman. Yes, we're going to talk about Dutty. So August, we'll say 14th, 1791, because that's when it's recognized. There's a lot of beautiful images of it. I'm just gonna read this from oops uh, the let's see. The history of the revolution then became a part of the religion. Some of whose practitioners see Bois Caiman ceremony as the founding moment of their religion, a charter both for gathering of different African nations and for unifications of African-born and Creole slaves in pursuit of liberation. The Bois Caiman remains a symbol of the achievement of the slave insurgents of Saint-Domingue, a symbol not of a specific event whose details we can pin down, but rather a creative, spiritual, and political epic that both prompted and emerged from the 1791 insurrection. So the spirituality and the liberation are mixed together in this national myth. They cannot actually be separated. The unification that was represented by this moment and the dedication towards moving towards freedom is the importance of the moment, not whether it was August 21st or August 14th. And dear God, you see about one of one, and then the other of the other. Sorry, what was that? Okay. So can you tell which one of these is the leader? There he is. Dutty Boukman. Boukman. Dutty Boukman is our first great leader. Born in Senegambia, enslaved in Jamaica. So Senegambia is like what we now call Senegal, or he was born in that area. He was self-taught and he taught others. He was a driver, which is to say he was a slave driver, and then he became a coachman, which is to say he was a driver, like he drove people around. It's very confusing. I kind of wish they came up with a different term other than slave driver. That's very confusing. Okay. But he was a Hugan. And again, was he really? We don't, he's a figure of myth, but probably. But he's a Hugan and the first major revolutionary leader. He is the figure. If often revolutions, we have to narrow it down to like the one person who did the thing, he's the person who did the thing. And he gave this great speech, which I guess I will read to you. And you know what? I'll get my glasses on because you can see how bad I was struggling with that passage from Dubois earlier. The God who created the earth, who created the sun that gave us light, the God who holds up the ocean, who makes the thunder roar, our God who has ears to hear, you who are hidden in the clouds, who watch us from where you are, you see that the white has made us suffer. The white man's God asks him to commit crimes, but the God within us wants us to do good. Our God, who is so good, so just, he orders us to avenge our wrongs. It's he who will direct our arms and bring us to victory, he who will assist us. That's the prayer. I've seen it written multiple different ways. What exactly how it was said, that was the main effect. The white man's God asks him to commit crimes. Listen to the voice for liberty that sings in all our hearts. So that started it. That started the revolution. That started the slave uprising. Now, how did the uprising work? Fairly simple. Kill. Okay, so if you're 10 to 1 on a plantation, you go in and you kill all the people who've been making you do the work that you don't want to do. You have machetes because you have to use machetes to cut down the sugar cane, so you can start with those. Maybe some of the drivers have weapons. Maybe the drivers or coachmen have guns. They can use those. Maybe they kill a master who has more weapons, who has more guns and more swords. Well, you take those and you give those to the guy next to you. That just keeps growing and growing. Kill, coerce, convince people to give up. To give up. There are some people who are saved. Some people, what they saved doctors, they saved priests, they saved, some former enslaved people would go out of their way to turn a kind eye towards somebody who treated them kindly, I suppose. That didn't last very long, we're going to see, but kill, coerce, save, imprison the prison who you people who you save, you have to imprison them, and fire. Fire always. I mentioned this in the last class, but I just need to emphasize that this is the central sad part of everything. They're going to win, they're going to free themselves. But the problem is the easiest way for anybody in that part of the world, the most profitable patch of land on planet Earth. They were standing on top of the most profitable patch of land on planet Earth. But they were forced to work there. They were forced to be in the fields. They were forced to boil the sugar and get burned. They were forced to use the machines and lose their arms. They were forced to do all these things. So they hated the sugar plantations. They hated the sugar factories. So they had to destroy them. As part of the revolution, they had to burn them down, and sugar canes goes up in a flash. But the sad thing is, once the revolution is over and they win, that would have been a way for their republic to actually thrive because they would have had a trade if they could have possibly brought themselves back mentally to do the work that they were just forced to do, which I don't think any takes a lot of fortitude to be able to do that. But then beyond that, if it was still a functioning sugar producing country, no one would have left them alone until they were back in chains. Everyone would have just kept coming back. You you can close a gold mine and say, no one come in here, but until you destroy all the gold, someone's going to keep coming in. And that's what it was with the sugar plantations. So this is the one of the central sadnesses of this moment, which is just so filled with sadness. So let's talk about what happened with some of our characters here. We're getting some action. We've seen them as they've traveled the Middle Passage or as they've had kids or all these things. Well, she escaped with Big White X to Le Cap Français. So we're going to see, they're in a plantation just outside. So it makes sense. People start burning things down. She escapes to Le Cap. And of course, Black Y, who had, of course, been a chief, he immediately joins the army and he's really excited and he's very passionate. Unfortunately, Black X, who we've been following for quite a while, isn't quite sure. He isn't positive if he should join. He doesn't know if it's a great idea, and he gets murdered by Black Y. This was another reality. You had to be on board because if you weren't on board, then you might be a threat. You might be a double agent. You might be a spy. You might be killing the leaders in the sleep. They had to act decisively. So we have one less character there. What of the whites and the coloreds? Well, Big White X took refugee with Black Z. The royal governor was already in Le Cap. So was the bourgeois white. Small white murdered. Of course. Of course he was murdered. He's one of the first people murdered. Slave Y murdered them immediately. And gotta say, I don't feel bad about it. A lot of us don't feel bad about it. Same thing with colored Y, also murdered by Black Y. Okay, even though he was colored and he did not experience all the same pleasures or the same freedoms as the whites, he was a slave driver, so he was also murdered. The bourgeois guy was already in Le Cap, and a sympathetic house slave helped him escape to Le Cap. If you don't remember, he started the the character of Colored Z started a plantation, right? His own little mini plantation of coffee, and he was allowed to escape by a sympathetic house slave. So we'll see what happens to him going in the future. And that's what happens to the plantation of Big White X. Fire and murder. That's what happens. And then we have the Cap Français with all of these people in there, all these people hiding out in the capital, and this is what they see. And this is so well described in the podcast that basically everyone is just sitting there and they're looking over the horizon and the fire just gets closer and closer. One time I took a vacation with my family to Yellowstone. Yeah, Yellowstone. And there's forest fires. And we were in this hotel in this valley. And you could just see the glowing red get closer and closer until we packed all of our stuff up and we immediately left. But that glowing feeling of growing fire and everything getting closer and closer, that was the experience that they were having. And anybody who was already enslaved and happened to be in the city, well, you might get murdered. Many of them were. If people were suspicious of you, they thought they had to, because once freedom is in the air, then you have 500,000 people who think that they get to be free, and you might be the one who's stopping them. Lots of terrible actions being taken here. And this is the idea. Just the belief right here. I want to talk about this. So this was written at the time. This comes from the Dubois book. All experienced colonists know that this class of men have neither the energy nor the combination of ideas necessary for the execution of this project, whose realization they nevertheless are marching toward with perseverance. This is what happens when you really believe in inequality. When you actually believe that human beings are not the same. It's crazy that people believe this, right? I mean, crazy is an offensive term because it's worse than crazy. It's completely lacking in all logic, right? All human beings are the same. We are just the same. There's only one species of dog. There's only one species of human being. We might look different, but we're all equal. We all have the same. interior mind. We all have the same, lizard desires. We all have the same aspirations. We might have different cultures, different skin, all that stuff. But like, we really are equal. So what happens when you actually believe that we're not equal? That's what happened. They actually believed that these people who they put down and cut off from any sense of coordination or pride or dignity, and just put in the absolute worst situations possible, they actually believed that these people who worked as hard, that were worked to death, were lazy. That these people who were forbidden from learning how to read or any advanced form of education were unintelligent. They actually believed it. So they weren't ready for it. They weren't ready for what was coming because they didn't actually believe in equality. They actually thought that white people were better than black people, which is lacking all reason. Okay. Again, I don't want to say crazy. It's lacking all reason. So this led to conspiracy theories. And I had my students fill this out for their homework. So I'll do this with you as well. Okay. Who is responsible for the slave uprising? Nobody believes it was the slaves, the enslaved people, because the perception was they were too stupid and lazy. Here, I won't do this for my students, but I'll do this for you. I'll give you the answers. Um, the whites, well, I said that wrong. The whites thought that the coloreds did it to secure their rights. The big whites thought it was the Society of the Friends of the Blacks to create more racial problems. Some small whites and coloreds thought it was the big whites to blame the May 15 decree like it's a false flag, right? And then some people thought it was Governor Blanchland to just create problems. Nobody could actually believe that these people, who are just human beings put into an impossible situation for several hundred years, were equal to them. And they paid for it. So we have three leaders in these early days. We have Boukman, we've already discussed, Jean-Francois, who was born in Africa. The podcast said he was born in Saint-Domingue. That's not true. Everyone gets to make mistakes. I make plenty of mistakes. For instance, in the last class, I said that um, I said that that someone went to France to fight racism in 1885. I meant 1785. It happens. So Jean-Francois was one of the leaders, um, who is a maroon. So if you remember what a maroon is, that's, oops, sorry, what's going on here? What am I actually sharing here? Sorry, I just messed up my view. Okay, right. So a maroon is someone who successfully fled. So he left. He was one of the 3,000 people that lived in those woods, that lived in those mountains, and he joined. He left his exile to try to free everybody else. Then we have Biassou, who is a Creole and who is a very faithful adept of Voodoo. And then we have this guy, Jeannot. Now, Jeannot is an interesting character. Jeannot is a very interesting character. He was murderous, he was torturous and cruel. He would capture people and he would all those things that you remember or that I didn't even tell you about, the different ways that enslaved people were tortured to death, things like, being eaten alive by insects and skin peeled off and explosive powder in the anus. I mean, just really terrible, horrible things, absolute war crimes. He would do that apparently with glee, like happily. Murderous, torturous, cruel. But he also helped to create some connections with Spain, which is going to be important soon. So I'm just saying that's Jeannot, the guy who's about to yeet the colonial there. Part of why this was able to work, and part of the reason why this will continue to work, is that there's European fighting styles, but there's also other fighting styles. This was an African fighting style that they used, which wasn't based on the same rules of engagement or the same style of engagement as France was. So they'd plant traps, they'd have small ambushing units, they'd attack from behind cover, they'd be quick to retreat. Like the second things weren't going well, they just leave because they knew, like, come on, like if we're not going to win, we're not going to win. Which of course meant a lot of people said, this is proof that they're all cowards. But no, they weren't cowards. They were just good at waging warfare. They would blow into a conch shell when they thought that things were going well to encourage people to come in and attack, which is funny because if you study, if you study like medieval French poetry, like I have been known to do, you might read the Chanson de Roland, where he blows his olifant, which is a like a trumpety kind of thing. It's a horn. It's like a big shell. And it's the same basic idea, like burr, burr, let's go. And in the end, there was like 10 enslaved people to one white person death ratio, which makes sense because the white people were better armed, probably better coordinated once they were in a defensive posture. And there was just not as many of them. There he was. Remember when I started telling you the story about him? How he was taken by by the other tribe and then taken to the door of no return. Yeah, there he is. And now he's there. So these are the four leaders of the early days. These are not the most famous people in the Haitian Revolution. We have not gotten to the two most famous names. These are the predecessors. In the middle of November 1791, Boukman dies in a fight. Just nothing fancy, just dies in a fight. And then the whites cut off his head and try to say, look, this is what happened. And everyone's kind of afraid, and this is going to lead to kind of a stalemate because without Boukman, people aren't quite sure what they're going to be able to do. Jean-Francois decides to kill Jeannot. Now, why did he do this? I'm going to be asking my students. Uh, why? I'll be telling you why right now. Because like you can't work with somebody who is torturing people to death and laughing about it. Their goal was not to kill all the French people. Their goal was to be freed, to have a life, to be able to live it, to strike some kind of agreement with the whites and the colors of Saint-Domingue. Like their goal was not kill everybody, take everybody out. Like they wanted like peace and freedom and happiness and prosperity for their people. Whereas Jeannot was just like burn them all down, kill them all, kill them, kill them, kill them all. Then the other reason is also, hey, they're fighting for power. Who's going to be the guy when this all settles? So by late 1791, it stalls. Meanwhile, in the South, the whites and colored is still a thing. That's why I wanted to show you this map so that you understand that if we're talking like Port-au-Prince to Cap Haïtien, that's like 120 miles, which is across a whole bunch of mountains. That's all over the place. That's really far away. So the whites and the coloreds are still duking it out. And I just want to just give Mike Duncan just a little shout out here. The dragoons were soundly drubbed. He's talking about the white soldiers who fought against the colored soldiers in the town of Mirebalais. And so they sent out dragoons, which was like their grouping of soldiers, and that they were easily defeated. But the way that he phrased it was the dragoons were soundly drubbed. So I look forward to explaining that sentence to all of my, 18, 19-year-old students who are taking this in their first semester of college. The dragoons were soundly drubbed. So the colors versus white, it's still happening. And the crazy thing, not the crazy thing, the interesting thing is they did it. The coloreds did it. They realized, okay, we have to. Now, this is not happening. This is happening independently of what's happening in the North. They're not connected with Boukman. They're not connected with Jeannot or Jean-Francois. They might be aware of some of the things that are happening, but this is not connected. But the coloreds realize, well, we don't have the numbers. So they invite the Swiss, which was their term for enslaved people who they promised freedom if they fought on their side. They promised them freedom if they fought alongside them. You fight with us, enslaved people, you fight with us, the coloreds, we will free you and we will be equals. Okay, that's the promise. And so the enslaved people fought and died alongside them. They win. Of course they win because they now have the numbers. And on top of that, they have the support of France because they're trying to do what France wants. And so they passed something called the Concordat, which I'm going to ask my students what they were. The Concordat was passed on October 19th. The second one, this is from the capitulation by the whites, this is quoted in C.R.R. James, we bring you finally words of peace. We come no longer to bargain with you. We come only to accord you your demands. You read what they said. They just said, like, we'll do whatever the hell you want. We were wrong. Our bad. Coloreds, we're equal. We're totally equal. We're totally equal. We're sorry. You're right. It's unbelievable. You never see things like this. You never see things like this. All citizens, equal rights between whites and coloreds, and they even have a little party in Port-au-Prince celebrating their unity. But then what happened to the Swiss? What happened to the Swiss? What are you going to do now that you freed them? Now that you've won, now that you've established like the coloreds have finally actually won something. They're doing things the way the French promised them would be done. So what can they do? What can they do with these enslaved people? They can't actually free them. They still need slavery. They have never been fighting against slavery. That's never been the coloreds' desire. They just want to be treated equally to the whites. So what do you do with them? Put them on a boat. They put them on a boat and they tried to sell them. No one wants to buy them. Who wants to buy somebody who just took up arms against white people from a country where white people are being murdered in the streets? Nobody. So they dump them off in a little island in Jamaica. The British find out about this. They kick them out of that island, send them back to Le Cap in Saint Domingue. Many of them are just shot, and then the rest of them are not permitted to land, and they starve to death on a boat. That was the freedom that they were promised. This will have long-lasting reverberations in the memories of them. Meanwhile, in the hexagon, in September 1791, the May 15th decree is repealed. It's repealed by Barnave. We need the money from slavery, and we need to respect colonial autonomy. Wait, what? You're going to repeal it? You're going to repeal it when in October we just came up with an agreement? Do you see? When are they going to get there? If they left in September, when? So France is going to send three people to come and announce that the May 15th decree has been annihilated. So while they're traveling across the ocean on their boat, while that's happening, the whites and the coloreds have peace. For like the first time in the history of forever, there's some kind of peace and agreement. And these three numbskulls are going to show up, and their job is going to be to say, actually, white supremacy good, racism good, coloreds have nothing. So what's going to happen with that? Come back to class on Friday. All right. Thank you for watching. I hope this was interesting. It's fascinating to teach. It takes a lot of effort. People have been asking, like, can I be like PayPal'd or something? I have a Patreon. I guess you can join my Patreon if you want. Patreon.com/Professor Sky. But I'm really doing this for the passion of sharing this information. So, all right. Well then, until next time, there's the camera.